Hi everyone. I'm back today, and I was studying today Abigail. And if you're like me, you don't know much about Abigail because I have never really looked at her story really closely or read a lot about her. And she's a very interesting woman and one that I think we could all learn something from, this whole story of Abigail. In order to do Abigail, I had read a bunch of background information, and I wanted to kind of set the scene a little bit because I had to do that first so that I knew where I was. Because this story is also in First Samuel, which is where we were when we were studying the book of Hannah, or the story of Hannah, and how Hannah had Samuel and dedicated him to the Lord, and he grew up in the temple with Eli. Well, this story takes place in First Samuel, but chapter 25. So this is quite a bit later. Well, a lot of things have happened in between. So I wrote some things down so that I could remember what had happened in between. First of all, you know that Samuel himself grew up to be a prophet, a leader, a judge. He was a man of God for his whole life. He didn't do so well with his sons, but he did serve the Lord. And he gave messages to the people as a prophet. And at one point, he really would have been kind of the last judge that they had. And at one point, he appointed his sons, who weren't the greatest of people, to serve as continuing service as priests and judges. And they were taking bribes, and they weren't just. They didn't do justice. They really were greedy and for themselves. So the people came to Samuel and said, we want a king. All the other countries around us, they all have a king, and we want a king. We don't want any more of these judges. So Samuel went to the Lord, and the Lord really told him to warn the Israelites, but eventually he gave in and said, fine, you want a king? Here's a king. And so he had Samuel appoint or anoint Saul as the first king. Well, Saul wasn't too bad in the beginning, but he really was more of a military leader. And the people liked him, I think, because he was, good looking and big and strong and, a good leader that way. But he really wasn't a man of God. And as his time went on, he became more and more and more working for himself and less about listening to Samuel or listening to God. So he wasn't really loyal to God. He wasn't very obedient. He in fact, at one point he set up a monument to himself after one of the wars that he won. So he really rejected whatever God was instructing him to do. Even after these battles, God would instruct him to do certain things, and he would just do whatever he wanted. So eventually God said, I'm done with Saul. Samuel, I want you to anoint David as king. Now remember, David was still a boy at this point, so he wouldn't have been able to take over as king at that point. But he was God's appointed and anointed king. And when Saul got to know David, and eventually David became friends with his son and so on and so forth, he began to realize that David was going to be a king. And he was jealous of David, and he got more and more into a rage, and eventually he tries to kill David, and David runs away and is on the run from Saul for a period of time, living in the wilderness, hiding in caves, all kinds of things. And he has an army of people that are with him, people who are his supporters. So that's when this story of Abigail takes place, is when David is in the wilderness, and he's fleeing Saul. He's hiding different places. And at one point, he even finds Saul in a cave, and he doesn't kill him. And he tells him, God doesn't want me to kill you. He wants to handle this himself. And Saul realizes that David is a good man, but still he hates him and still wants to kill him so that he won't become king. So at one point, David is in the wilderness, and eventually Samuel, who began this whole story, has now become an old man and is ready to die. So the story kind of takes place, or starts, in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse. In fact, we could, verse 1. Yep. Okay, so now what's happening is we're getting towards the end of 1 Samuel, which again was all the story of Samuel's life. And eventually it's going to start Second Samuel, the chapter. There's only, I think, 32 chapters, 31 chapters in First Samuel. So we're right at the end of that book. And when it goes into Second Samuel, it's more about David. Even though it's named Second Samuel, for some reason, it's not really about Samuel. But First Samuel is. So it ends, his life ends in chapter 25. And it begins this way. Now Samuel died, and all of Israel gathered for his funeral. They buried him at his house in Ramah. And then David moved to the wilderness of Maon. So what I'm thinking is probably David was there for this funeral, but he doesn't want Saul to catch up with him, so he's on the run, and he's running down to the wilderness at Maon. There was a wealthy man from Maon who owned property near the town of Carmel. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and it was sheep shearing time. It's hard to say. Sheep shearing time. Now, two important facts that I found out in my reading that I could share with you that I think are important. The first is that it was expected custom of the time that when there were travelers who came to a certain area, of course they couldn't get into the local Holiday Inn. They couldn't go to the local McDonald's for food. The custom of the time was, if there were travelers, even a big army like David had, the custom of the time would be that you would feed them and take care of them and shelter them, because that was what people did for one another. It was expected. It was the custom. And again, that's because there wasn't any hotels or restaurants around. This was way back in a time when the wilderness was a dangerous place to be, and the only comfort you could find really was with another family, with people who lived in that area. So that would have been the expected custom of the time. The second thing you need to know is that David's army had been in these hills now for quite a while, and in a sense became a security force surrounding the people that were living in that area. So the people in that area kind of liked him, kind of liked the fact that they were there, because it provided security for them. Okay, so it's not like this was a big surprise that David and his army were there at sheep shearing time. But sheep shearing time, from what I have read, would have been a time of celebration. It was a time for saying, it was almost like when you do the harvest and bring the harvest in, we have a big celebration. The harvest was good. Sheep shearing is like, wow, this was good. We've had a good year. We've got a lot of sheep. We can shear them all. People would have come in to do the sheep shearing, to help out with that. So there would have been other people to feed there. There would have been a lot of drinking going on, a lot of feasting. This was a time of celebration. So, so that's kind of two things of interest, just to keep in the back of your mind as we're listening to this story. Okay, so this man called Nabal had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and it was sheep shearing time. The man's name was Nabal, and his wife, Abigail, was a sensible and beautiful woman. That's a great thing to hear about somebody. Wouldn't you like to have that on your epitaph? She was a sensible and beautiful woman. Two things we know about her here. Physically, she was pretty. She was, nice looking woman. And maybe she even had an inner beauty, because she was a sensible woman, This beauty doesn't mean that she put on a lot of makeup, It more, to me anyway, when I read it, means that she was just a great gal, And I'm sure people like that. Just a nice, sensible, good-looking woman. That's our Abigail. Okay, so she was a sensible and beautiful woman. But Nabal, a descendant of Caleb, was crude and mean in all his dealings. Interesting. So Nabal was a descendant of Caleb, and he was crude and he was mean in all his dealings, which meant it wasn't just that he didn't like David or didn't like David's army coming to talk to him, which is going to happen in a minute, but he just was mean to everybody, I think. Crude and mean in all his dealings. Interesting, I thought. Let me look up this verse, this First Samuel 25, in a different version. Maybe like, the NIV, and let's see how these people are described in the New International Version. This says, a certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. So notice the fact that he had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep meant that he had some money, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman. So here again, we're talking about, she's sensible. She's got some smarts here, and she's beautiful. So actually, she's a pretty good catch, isn't she? You'd think her husband would be kind of happy to have her, right? No. But her husband was surly and mean in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. Well, what does it mean to be a Calebite? I guess the son of Caleb. Maybe that meant something to them. It doesn't mean anything to me, but I'm going to look it up and I'll find out later and let you know. Okay, so I'm going back to my New Living Translation now. This is verse 4. When David heard that Nabal was nearing shearing his sheep, he sent 10 of his young men to Carmel with this message for Nabal, or Nabal, however you say it. Let's think about this. When David heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep, so he didn't just pick any old time, okay? David is contacting him because he knows that this is a time of celebration. It's a time when extra people will be there and therefore extra provisions will be there, right? He knows that Nabal will have on hand, food and drink and other things to feed other people at the shearing time. And this is a happy time. It's a happy time. So when David heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep, he sent 10 of his young men to Carmel with this message for Nabal. Notice too that he sends 10 men. He didn't send an army. Okay, he didn't try to intimidate Nabal. He just sent 10 messengers. And here's what they said. Peace and prosperity to you, your family, and everything you own. Okay, that's how they started out. They started out by saying, long life to you, good health to you and your household. They're saying, hi, we're here in good faith. They're not coming with some kind of a threat. This is verse 7. I am told that it is sheep shearing time. While your shepherds stayed among us near Carmel, we never harmed them, and nothing was ever stolen from them. Ask your own men, and they will tell you this is true. So first they're establishing what they did not do. Okay, they probably could have, with all of their armies and their weapons and whatnot, they could have invaded this area. They could have gone into people's houses and stolen their food. They could have gone to the sheep and just taken what they wanted from the field, right? I mean, they could have been violent about it. They could have extorted, provisions from people. Instead of that, they protected everybody. They said, no, we're going to be nice guys here, We're not going to go in and just be like a conquering army and, to the victor go the spoils kind of thing. We're not going to do that. And so he's saying to Nabal, he's kind of, these messengers are reminding Nabal that we've been here quite a while. We haven't stolen from you. We haven't pushed you around at all. We haven't gotten in the faces of all these people. But now we know that you've got some extra provisions and you're having a big celebration here. So this is what they are asking of him. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable towards my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. These men would not have been asking for anything that was not the custom of the time. And especially not the custom. Especially it was the custom at sheep shearing time. So this was a time when you would have been sharing with a lot of people anyway, and feasting and having extra provisions. And they're just saying, we are sojourners. We don't live here, but we've been living here for a while and we haven't touched any of your stuff. And would you give us some food for our men? That's basically what they're asking. So let's see what Nabal says to them. Okay, it says, please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. Okay, they're not even asking for a lot here. They're just asking for, whatever he can find for them. And when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. And then they waited. So they didn't just say, we're asking for this. They said, the anointed king, David, who's going to take over for Saul someday, and he's got his army with him, he's the one asking for this. Okay? And this is what Nabal answered. Nabal answered David's servants, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men who comes from who knows where? This is not good. This is not good. That was the NIV version. Let's see what the New Living Translation says. Who is this fellow David? Nabal sneered at the young men. I love that. That's sneered, that word, Who is this? That's how I hear it, Who does this son of Jesse think he is? There are lots of servants these days who run away from their masters. Should I take my bread and water and the meat I've slaughtered for my shearers and give it to a band of outlaws who come from who knows where? So he is sneering at them. He really is giving them a slur because he's saying, who the heck do you think you are? I don't even know where you come from. Maybe you're just people that ran away from your masters. Maybe you're just slaves who ran away. He is not being very smart. I think he's extremely foolish and uncaring of the consequences of what he's going to say. And so he's kind of stupid, really, and also rude. He didn't have to say that. He could have been polite. He could have been, charming. Gee, I'm sorry, I got too much here. I got too many people to feed. I don't think I can spare anything. Even that would have been rude, but at least it wouldn't have been stupid and foolish. What he did is stirred up a hornet's nest and didn't care. Whatever happens, happens, He doesn't care. He's really a big blowhard bully kind of guy, isn't he? So let's see what happens when these people go back to talk to David. So David's young men returned and told him what Nabal had said. Get your swords, was David's reply, and he strapped on his own. And then 400 men started off with David, and 200 remained behind to guard their equipment. So he has 600 men here. Okay, 400 of them are going to go with him and attack Nabal. Meanwhile, though, here's where Abigail comes in. Meanwhile, one of Nabal's servants went to Abigail. Now, these servants do not want to have David attacking them, okay? And they know enough not to go to Nabal and talk to him because he's a big, blowhard, stupid guy who's crude and rude. Who do they go to? They go to Abigail. They know she's sensible, and they know she's poised and charming and will know what to do. They trust her, obviously, because they go right to her. And told her, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, but he screamed insults at them. So now we know that he did not say it in a nice way. He was insulting to them. He said to them, maybe you're just runaways. Why should I feed you? He insulted them. They are big warriors. Do you think they want to take that? Verse 15, these men have been very good to us. We never suffered any harm from them. Nothing was stolen from us the whole time they were with us. Not only did they not come in and steal from us, they're saying to her, but David's men, the fact that David's men were there meant that the people were protected. Nobody stole from them while David's people were there. So they felt this was a good thing to have David there. Why not treat them, David and his men, why not treat them favorably, politely, respectfully? The servants that David sent, they were pretty respectful, So in fact, day and night, they were like a wall of protection for us and the sheep. So now they're saying not only did they steal from us, but they protected us. You need to know this and figure out what to do, for there is going to be trouble for our master and his whole family. He is so ill-tempered that no one can even talk to him. And I love the next verse. Starts out this way. Abigail wasted no time. Okay, she knows her husband, and she is going to do something about this situation. And I find it interesting that she is not only intelligent, sensible, and beautiful, but she is a person of action. When she hears there's a problem, she wastes no time at all. And she's going to do something very interesting to take care of this problem. And that's what I'm going to look at in the next session. So today was lots of background about this situation and to introduce you to Abigail, a beautiful, sensitive, and intelligent woman. And in the next time I look at this, we're going to go further into her story. So that should be good. Until then, I hope you are having a great day. Take care.